What terrifying confession has someone told you while intoxicated? Story 1, freshman year of college. Among all the new friends I made that year, there was one guy who was always a goofball, very laid back, casual, and down for whatever. The biggest red flag we noticed was that whenever people were drinking and hanging out, he would always essentially black out, drinking way too much and kind of spaghetti noodling his way around the party. One night, while also intoxicated and after the party had wound down, a few people and I asked him why he always went so hard. While drooping his head a lot, swaying around and slurring everything, he told us about how a few months earlier, the summer before college started, his best friend had called him. They lived in a small town by the beach, and his friend asked him to come meet him to watch the sunset by the water. He biked over there, sat down, and they talked for a while, and everything seemed fine. Then his friend took out a pistol and shot himself in the head, killing himself instantly. Apparently, my friend had to call the police while covered in blood and bodily debris, completely in shock. A few weeks later, he went off to college, a few states away, still in shock and unable to sleep or focus on anything. He did not remember telling us that story, and I do not think any of us wanted to bring it up. His drinking habits did not change until he was about to graduate, by which point he started going to therapy. Got a job right after graduation, and seems to be doing better in the years since, thank God. Story 2. This was about 6 months ago. My brother and I were getting drunk one night because it was the weekend and we just wanted to get messed up and play video games. We had done plenty of shots and plenty of drinks, and we were the definition of wasted. We were having fun playing some old Call of Duty World at War Zombies for nostalgia, and we paused it to grab some chips. As I was grabbing the salsa, he told me that he had tried to take his own life about a month before that. He had taken some pills, they pumped his stomach, and he told me that the whole time he was thinking of me and how horrible and depressed I would be if he had died, and that he would never want to lose me. I told him that I had also tried to take my own life a while earlier, and that I had thought the exact same thing about him. We continued playing zombies while talking about everything under the sun, and we have talked every day since, have never missed and will never miss a day. We are both doing a lot better now, and we are both in therapy, and it is nice having someone to talk to and trust about these things. Story 3. My great-grandfather was in World War II, and he never ever spoke about it. If you asked him about it, he would politely get up, grab his drink, and go somewhere else. After my first deployment to Afghanistan, he called me and said that he could finally talk to someone. I started spending a lot of time with him, telling him stories, and he would tell me some of his. When I went on leave, we had a night where the two of us were going drink for drink. After a while, he told me about a time when he and his unit found a small concentration camp, because they are not all large camps. He said the first thing he remembered was the smell, and that it was so bad he almost threw up several times. This camp did not have ovens or gas chambers, but when they went through the north side of the camp, there was a pit that had been dug out. Inside the pit, there must have been thousands of decaying bodies, and he was sure that the ones on the bottom were probably just skeletons. When they talked to the people there, they said the Nazis would line people up at random and shoot them, and their bodies would simply fall in. He said the Jewish prisoners told them that as some starved to death, they would throw themselves in, hoping to break their necks when they hit. The Germans knew the Allies were close, so they locked the gates, took the food or poisoned it, and put dead bodies in the place where they stored the water. He said the disease and infections were so bad that many of the soldiers in his unit were afraid to help them. He told me that out of all the things he had been through, that was the worst, and that it tore him apart, saying those poor people haunted his dreams. He felt like he did not do enough, and that every time they could not push the line forward, it was just another day or another week those people had to be tortured. My great-grandfather was proud of his time in World War II, lived a long life, and died in 2011 at home in his bed while watching his favorite show. Story 4. On my birthday, I got really wasted drinking at home with friends and let slip my most devastating memory from my time in the military, which is really the source of my post-traumatic stress disorder. While in Afghanistan, my unit stumbled upon a stray herd of goats in an area where we regularly met with an informant we knew to be a shepherd. We found a mass of 17 decaying bodies that were the entirety of the man's nomadic clan. It was presumed that the informant had been discovered by the Taliban and that they put the entire group to death and left them there to rot. I spent the better part of a week burying the bodies. Some were decapitated, including one child. I think my friends were arguing about Ukraine, and I was just drunkenly frustrated because none of them had seen the terrifying reality of what happens in war. And to so many people, it is just a headline. I was 19 when this happened, and it became the focal point for changing many of my worldviews. And I decided not to renew my enlistment for this reason. I understand the conflict in Ukraine is different from the war in Afghanistan, but I was extremely drunk and have always resented how a large portion of Americans take a backseat approach to promoting violence around the globe because they have never seen it firsthand. I later found out, after the deployment when I was back in Germany, that the manner in which we buried these people was wildly inconsistent with Islamic and Pashtun burial traditions. I could not have known that at the time, but I have always had a strong suspicion that this event was never made known to the Afghan people in order to cover up United States involvement and questions about the informant network, and especially now that the Taliban are in charge. I have always had some deeply personal regrets about the events that led up to this, because part of my job was to coordinate information requests for operational intelligence. And these requests would occasionally require the aid of an informant, even though how the information was obtained was generally not considered necessary for me to know. I live with the very real possibility that while I was sitting at a desk trying to get bullet points for a presentation, I initiated a chain of events that contributed to the gruesome deaths of innocent people. Story 5. They did not tell me this while they were drunk, but I think it fits here. I am a volunteer at a nursing home, and when one of the female residents was close to death, she confided this in me. At one point in her life, her husband cheated on her with the neighbor's wife. When the neighbor's husband found out, he was extremely upset and was planning to physically harm her husband. They worked out a deal where the neighbor's husband would not hurt him if he was allowed to return the favor. In essence, her husband agreed to let the neighbor have her in order to save himself from a severe beating. It gets worse, because she later became pregnant and told her husband for the rest of his life that the child was his, even though she honestly believed the child belonged to the neighbor. Her entire life she carried this burden about her son and about what her husband had done to her, both by cheating on her and by trading her away like property. It was truly a heartbreaking conversation. Story 6. My parents finally admitted that they had another child who died before my twin sister and I were born. This alone was not exactly terrifying, because unfortunately that does happen sometimes. But what made it terrifying was the fact that my sister and I already knew. Yet for our entire lives, our parents had convinced us that we were misremembering. I am not sure how we knew, because our brother died a year before we were born, and we never met him. There are no pictures of him, and he was never mentioned. Our parents, along with the rest of our family, collectively erased him, which is completely in line with our family since they tend to close ranks and forget anything they do not want to acknowledge. Yet somehow, from a very early age, my sister and I told everyone that we had a brother, and many of our school friends were aware of him. When it was finally revealed that it was just the two of us, our friends accused us of lying, but my sister and I were genuinely confused because we knew it was true. Many times over the years, we confronted our parents about it, and every single time they lied to us, promising we never had any other siblings and insisting we were just confused. Then one day when they were both drunk, we overheard them talking about him and ran downstairs to confront them, and they finally confessed. This still does not explain how we knew, and I can only imagine we must have heard or seen something when we were very young that we no longer consciously remember. But it is disturbing beyond belief that the entire family lied to us for 16 years. We even remembered his name. The most terrifying part of all is that my sister and I still believe they are lying, because both of us have a distinct memory of playing with a slightly older boy when we were very young. And both of us remember thinking of him as our older brother within the context of that memory. Story 7. I was at a bar one night in an affluent town when an older man next to me started talking about his sailing days. He said he had a 60-foot sailboat and used to sail all over North and South America, and his story dated back to the mid-1980s. One night, he was anchored near an island off the coast of Venezuela, and he was there with his girlfriend. They had just fallen asleep when he heard a bump. At first, he did not think much of it and barely noticed it, but he decided to check it out anyway. He left the sleeping berth and, like on most sailboats, had to climb a set of steep stairs to get from the cabin to the aft deck. He said he always kept a pistol holstered and hanging from the side of the stair rail, and almost as an afterthought, he grabbed it while climbing the stairs. When he was about halfway out onto the deck, he saw a man coming over the railing holding an automatic weapon, something like an assault-style rifle. He said he fired 2 rounds into the man, and the man fell back over the railing. He ran over and looked down, only to see that the man had fallen into his boat, and that there was another armed man there as well, also holding a similar weapon. He said he shot that second man a couple of times, pulled up anchor, and immediately left the area. He explained that pirate activity was not unheard of in that region, and that people like this would board boats, restrain the occupants, take everything, and then destroy the boat with the people still on it. The bump he had heard earlier was the other boat pulling alongside his. He said that was his very last visit to South America. Story 8. My first roommate in college got extremely drunk one night after his girlfriend broke up with him. While I was helping him into bed, he told me that he had assaulted her in his bed when she had passed out from medication while she was sick. And he also told me that it happened while I was sleeping, with us being only about 10 to 15 feet away from each other. He described to me in detail everything he had done to her. I felt absolutely sick about it. A couple of weeks later, I found his ex-girlfriend on campus and talked to her about it, telling her how I felt, and it was not an easy conversation. She reassured me that she did not hold me responsible for what he did to her, but I offered to testify if she chose to report him and if it moved through the system. My roommate ended up leaving the university at the end of that semester, and I did tell the administration what he had told me, but he argued that he was drunk and claimed that I had coerced him into talking about it. During the proceedings and the time leading up to them, I ended up switching roommates because of how passive-aggressive he became toward me. It is still deeply disturbing, and I wish I had not been such a heavy sleeper because I might have woken up, and even now I still carry a small amount of guilt. I was later invited to her wedding, and we caught up, and her husband and I would often spend time talking since we had similar class schedules. Story 9. I was at a bachelor party with a friend I knew from high school and some other people we had grown up with, although I would not really call all of them friends. One of them was always a loudmouth who thought he was a tough guy and went straight into the United States Marine Corps after high school, and I will refer to him as a friend of a friend. He had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan and was supposed to go back for a third, but he did not and was still in the United States for the party. After gambling and drinking all night, he started telling us that a certain Afghan tribe in a remote province was involved in abusing and exploiting young boys, and that he and a few others on patrol would routinely shoot the villagers' livestock as target practice. He then casually added that sometimes there were stray bullets. I later learned what he meant by that, because it turned out that he and his convoy had actually opened fire on and killed several villagers. The reason he never returned for his planned deployment was that they were all court-martialed and dishonorably discharged, although they did not face further punishment for killing civilians. He himself had claimed that he shot a child because the child supposedly had an explosive vest on, but that was later proven to be untrue. He is now a police officer who has shot and killed 3 people while on duty over the last 6 years, and each case has been ruled as self-defense despite what many consider to be significant evidence suggesting otherwise. Story 10. I am not sure if this is genuinely terrifying, but it deeply bothered me when it happened. This all happened more than 6 years ago. I rented a house with 3 other guys who I knew well enough to live with, and we had parties relatively often. Over time, we all noticed that some of our belongings were going missing. We never turned on each other, and we all agreed that it had to be people who came over for the parties, and eventually we all went our separate ways and are still friends. Years later, I was at a bar and ran into an old high school classmate, and since our high school was small, we all pretty much knew each other. This guy, who was currently in the police academy, started joking about all the terrible things he had done and how he thought it was funny that he was going to be a police officer. He was extremely drunk. He started talking about how he and a friend would go to house parties, and one of them would do card tricks and sleight of hand to get the party's attention while the other would go through the house and steal things. As he was telling me this, everything started connecting. He and his friend had been welcome at our house parties. They were there often, and one of them almost always had a backpack on, which was kind of his thing. I called him out on what he was saying, and he awkwardly left. I never did anything about it besides telling my friends and former housemates. For context, he never became a police officer, and for whatever reason, he did not make it. This unsettled me deeply because of the trust I had in people and friends, and it terrified me in a way that has stuck with me as a lifelong lesson. Story 11, I got drunk with a good friend I had not seen in a little over the holidays, and he confessed to me that he regretted being a father to 3 young children, but felt like he was too deep into it to do anything about it. He said he hated his life as a father, and that it was the biggest mistake he had ever made. He secretly drinks himself to sleep every night, because otherwise that is all he dreams about and thinks about. He was crying the entire time he was talking to me, and I could tell it was really hurting him, and I did not know what to say, so I just let him talk. I personally have never wanted children and have known this since I was 10 or 11, and I am very open about not wanting them, which is why he felt comfortable enough to tell me this. He is afraid that our other friends who have children would shun and judge him, and honestly, they probably would, because young parents can be quite judgmental from my experience, and the amount of criticism they have given me for not wanting children speaks for itself. I never told anyone, obviously, because it is none of my business. What baffles me is that he is a really great father and his children absolutely love him. He has a good relationship with his girlfriend, and they have been together for over 10 years. He does everything for his children, to the point where I thought he was exaggerating at first. It turns out he was not, and he just knows how to hide it. I think the pandemic and the current state of the world really affected my friend and a lot of young parents as well. Story 12, I know a Vietnam War veteran who goes by the name Soldier. He struggles with alcohol, loves crack coca, and talks a lot about Jesus. He was a kind man who would take out trash for a few dollars, and we got to know him fairly well. From locals, we learned that even as a young boy, Soldier was never quite right mentally and never should have been drafted because there was always something off about him. Yet he was still sent to Vietnam. One drunken day, he joined us for a game of beer pong at my home, where we were cooking on the grill, sitting down and smoking marijuana. And he was having a great time while we enjoyed his company and his stories. He told us that he operated a tank, and one day a sniper disabled the tracks, leaving them unable to move, forcing them to evacuate the tank. While escaping, he took a severe graze to the shoulder and head, and the next thing he remembered was waking up wounded in a Vietnamese village where people were caring for him. He said the villagers would beg him to go home, telling him that it was not his war, and they fed him and nursed him back to health. Not long after, he woke up to the sounds of helicopters and gunfire, and the village was under attack by American soldiers. He said he tried to stop them but could not, so he picked up a rocket launcher and shot down his own helicopters to protect what he called the only people who had ever been kind to him. He was discharged from the military, lived on the streets, and could not read. He once brought me mail from the government stating that his money was being held up and was pending appeal, which I read for him when I was a young teenager, and he had been waiting for that money for years. I do not see him anymore, except occasionally on arrest records, and I do not know if he ever received his money. Every time we used to drink together, he would become emotional and want everyone to know how much he loved and appreciated them, and he would always tell that same story, and it never changed. Story 13, I went to a Halloween party several years ago, and later in the night, a group of maybe 20 people had gathered outside around a fire pit. Everyone was just standing around talking in smaller groups, as usually happens at parties. I walked inside for some reason and came back outside maybe 10 minutes later. When I returned, instead of seeing small groups of people talking among themselves, most everyone was quiet while a very drunk guy was telling a story. I did not know him, and I later found out that other than his girlfriend who he came with, no one else at the party knew him either. He was telling this story to a group of around 20 complete strangers. The story was about a family vacation to Europe when he was a teenager, during which he was cruelly assaulted by a man. As the story went on, he became more emotional, and when it became clear where the story was heading, his girlfriend tried to stop him, saying things like asking if he was sure he wanted to tell this now, or suggesting that he tell her the rest when they got home. None of that worked. He finished the story in vivid detail, and afterward he said something along the lines of not believing he actually got all of that out and that he had never told anyone before. The entire situation was incredibly awkward, and it is hard to fully explain. I felt terrible for him and hated that he went through something like that, and I hope that getting it off his chest made him feel better. But given how drunk he was and his admission that he had never told anyone, I cannot help but think that when he woke up the next morning, he was hit with a whole other level of trauma when he realized or was reminded of what he had shared with a large group of strangers. I am not judging him for getting it off his chest. I just hope he was ultimately comfortable with how it happened. Story 14. A friend called me one night asking if he could stay at my place. And when he arrived, I found out that he and his wife had neighbors over for drinks earlier that evening. His wife said she was going out to get cigarettes, but she took much longer than she should have and stopped answering her phone. He drove to the shopping center where the gas station was and found his wife in a car with another man. He became extremely upset, the police were called, and they ended up dropping him off at my house, which was about a 20-minute drive away in a different suburb. They had a young daughter at the time and have since had a son. I thought he was going to divorce her, but they stayed together, and he made me swear I would never tell anyone, which I honored for the next 4 years. We have a fairly large group of mutual friends, and I was not even his first call asking for a place to stay because we are not the closest friends in that group. This situation led him to start drinking too much, and occasionally he would pick fights while drunk, including during another friend's wedding. Since I was the only one who knew what had happened, I felt obligated to try to help him keep himself together, and he told me the only reason they were still together was because of their children. At the wedding, I had to explain to others that he was just drunk and bringing up old issues with his wife. A few months ago, another friend told me that our friend had gotten extremely drunk and became unresponsive, and that his wife called asking him to come over. He told her to call an ambulance and went there himself. Our friend then told him that his wife had cheated on him 3 times, even though I only knew about one incident. One of those involved a relationship with one of their friends when he moved from Los Angeles to start a new job, and she did not move out for a few months. I do not know all the details, but this friend was shocked that I had not told my wife and said he had already told his own. That night, I finally told my wife. We still spend time with this couple fairly regularly, and I do not know if his wife knows that I am aware of her infidelity, but the rest of our friend group does not know. They just see our friend get drunk and act foolish without understanding why, and I still have to bite my tongue and pretend I do not think his wife is a terrible person. Story 15. My paternal grandmother was not a financially stable person, but she was the most caring grandparent a kid could ever hope to have. My immediate family was firmly middle class when I was growing up, so I did not realize until adolescence that she was constantly buying things she could not afford in an effort to spoil her 5 grandchildren. All of us had a baby's day out style sleepover at her tiny house 1 weekend per month, basically, until we all started driving. She would pull us out of school on our birthdays and bring us home with new video games and a month's worth of sweets, and she consistently gave the coolest gifts at Christmas. She was also caring for my adult aunt with Down syndrome, despite the fact that they both had health issues that should have warranted in-home nursing care at various points. I mention all of this to clearly establish how impactful her borderline unhealthy level of spoiling was to our childhood happiness. She was a bit of a hypochondriac, wildly irresponsible with money, and had a tendency to guilt my father into maintaining toxic relationships within our extended family. But I loved that woman fiercely and considered her a saint for much of my young life. Things became difficult in my immediate family right before I moved away for college, so her phone calls were the only check-ins I was happy to take. The presents tapered off after high school graduation, but the love and care never did. After I finished my undergraduate degree, her health declined rapidly. I began scheduling as many long weekends off work as possible to make the hours-long drive home to spend time with her, knowing our time together was limited. On my second-to-last visit, it was obvious she was under the influence of prescribed palliative narcotics from the moment I walked in, but I did not care. I sat on the couch with her for hours, talking and listening to her sleepy, fleeting thoughts. And when she grew quiet, I reminisced about my childhood sleepovers, which seemed to make us both happy. Half joking, I asked what drove her to spoil us so much. Her face became solemn, and her voice dropped to a whisper as she said it was because her marriages had stolen my father's childhood. She then opened a mental vault of horrific family history, revealing that all three men she married, including my biological grandfather, were abusive to varying degrees. I had discovered some family secrets growing up, but none of the worst details. It turned out her second husband, my aunt's biological father, was the most violent of them all, fueled by substance abuse and prescription pills. My grandmother would send him away on supposed fishing trips to protect the household. One evening, he came speeding into the driveway in a rage, screaming threats and obscenities, saying he was going to murder everyone in the house and throw their bodies over a nearby dam, and he was approaching with a butcher cleaver and rope, leaving no doubt about his intentions. My grandmother and my uncle, who was barely 12 at the time, shot him with a 12-gauge shotgun and a 30-06 deer rifle before he reached the porch. The police arrived and removed the body, and that was the end of it. I was completely speechless, shaken not only by the trauma she endured, but by learning that this woman I viewed as a saint had lived a life so brutal that it culminated in a justified killing. I left shortly after, and when I returned a few weeks later, emergency services had already arrived minutes before me, and she was gone, found collapsed on her living room floor by my aunt. That conversation and a few brief voicemail exchanges were the last words I ever shared with my grandmother. Story 16. I knew something was wrong with my wife, so we took the kids to a local park, and I suggested having some drinks, which she agreed to. At first it was fun and lighthearted, but as she loosened up, she told me she needed to be with other men and apologized, saying we married too young and she felt the need to sleep with random people. I obviously did not agree, and that is when I learned she had already been seeing someone else behind my back for months. She told me she would leave work to meet him, even on days when the kids missed her badly. She admitted there was a time she left work to be with him, and then came home and let me touch her before running to the bathroom under the excuse that she needed to use it. And that was when I realized what I had noticed on my hands. She later showered and was intimate with me, and I had no idea what it was until that day at the park when everything came out. Since then, I have been dealing with a crushing depression that completely destroyed me. She broke my heart and never showed any remorse. She fits every definition of a narcissistic sociopath, and there was far more she did that I could write an entire book about. Something so unbelievable it would sound fictional, yet it was real. In my eyes, she is completely evil. Story 17. It was not confessed directly to me, but I overheard my drunk mother telling her friends that she wished she had aborted me because I ruined her life. For context, I was an extremely well-behaved child and teenager, especially compared to my younger sister, who was volatile and cruel and yet was completely adored by my parents. When my sister was younger, she was selectively mute and had anxiety so severe that she regularly broke out in hives, while I had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that my parents insisted did not exist and refused to treat until I sought help as an adult. Anytime I showed signs of struggling, I was punished and learned to mask my behavior at a very young age to the point that I did not even realize I was doing it. If I display symptoms around them now, I am told I am stupid or making things up. My sister, however, received years of extremely expensive therapy, the best of everything, and the majority of my parents' time and money, including entire weekends, devoted to her swim meets, while I could not even stay enrolled in one non-competitive dance class. She earned a pastry arts degree and was praised endlessly for being a perfect student, while I struggled through 2 accounting degrees with an undiagnosed learning disability and was constantly criticized. Her teenage years included violent behavior, destroying property, physical attacks against me, threatening me with utensils, endangering my life by grabbing my steering wheel while I was driving, and countless other incidents. Everyone who meets my family immediately notices how heavily my parents favor her. Currently, she is unemployed, has not worked in 2 years, and refuses required vaccinations despite holding a registered nurse qualification. Yet my parents brag endlessly about her accomplishments. Meanwhile, I have increased my income by $12,000, purchased a car and a home, and maintained peace within the family. Yet I am still treated as the problem. My parents openly acknowledge that my sister is difficult and that I am the good one. Yet I am still labeled as the one who ruined everything. Years of this treatment have destroyed my self-confidence and left lasting damage, making it difficult for me to form trusting relationships with older authority figures, and I avoid having children despite wanting them because I am terrified of repeating the same harm that was done to me. Story 18. It was not really a terrifying confession, but a terrifying experience that came from it. My fiance and I were staying at a motel until we could find an apartment, and there was a bar on the lower level beneath our floor. His close friend and that friend's fiance lived in the apartments next to the motel, and the four of us spent time together often. One day while my fiance was out, his friend came over, knocked on the door, and asked me to go to the bar downstairs with him because he did not want to go alone due to severe social anxiety. I was about to say no, but before I could respond, he pushed the door open further, let himself into the room, and flopped onto the bed, and I could already tell he was somewhat intoxicated. I became very uncomfortable and did not want to be alone in the room with him, and since I am a shy person, I agreed to go downstairs just to get out of the room and be around other people. I had a strong bad feeling and was flustered, so focused on leaving that I forgot the room key, and the door automatically locked behind us. As soon as we left, he kept asking to hug me, which felt strange, and that was when I realized I did not have the key and started panicking internally. At the bar, he kept ordering me drinks even though I refused multiple times, insisting he would put them on his fiance's tab, and even when I did not drink them, he continued ordering more. He started asking personal questions about my relationship, trying to find problems, then put his hand on my leg and behaved in ways that made me extremely uncomfortable, eventually telling me that he liked me and sharing inappropriate details about his own relationship, repeatedly telling me not to tell my fiance, who was his best friend. Even though there were other people around, the bar was small and I was terrified. When he went to the bathroom, I took the opportunity to run to the office to get a new room key, and thankfully the woman there gave me one. Knowing he would realize I was gone, I ran into the woods and walking trail behind the motel and immediately called my fiance, telling him everything, and he told me to go back to the room, lock the door, and that he was on his way. As I walked down the long hallway toward the room, I saw his friend coming from the opposite direction, and he ran ahead of me, blocking the door and begging me not to leave and not to tell anyone. I told him I wanted to go and did not want to spend time with him anymore, and he punched the wall right next to my head. I got inside, locked the door, and he left. A few minutes later, my fiance arrived, and I was explaining what happened when we suddenly saw the doorknob turning and someone trying forcefully to get in. My fiance opened the door, and his friend was shocked to see him there, and my fiance told him to go home, but he kept pushing him back and telling him to fight. My fiance shut and locked the door again, and the man then rammed the door with his head and broke it open. He was much larger than my fiance, and they began fighting on the floor while I screamed and ran to the bar for help. The hotel owner, his son, and another man came up, and it took all three of them to restrain him. Police and paramedics arrived because he was bleeding heavily, and he spit at them, claimed I was his girlfriend, and said other delusional things. I am incredibly grateful my fiance arrived when he did. Story 19. Blind drunk. My mother once told me in vivid detail about the abuse she suffered during her childhood. I knew it had happened, but I did not understand the full extent of it until that night. She was assaulted repeatedly into her mid-20s, even after she had my older sister and became pregnant with my brother, and she was beaten almost daily. My father believed my brother was not his after learning the truth while my mother was pregnant, and when he confronted her father attacked him and put him into a coma. My grandmother knew about everything and did nothing to stop it, and she even participated in the abuse. My mother had two older brothers and a sister, and only one brother was abused occasionally while the others were left alone. My mother can be difficult to handle at times, but I understand why, because she stayed silent for so long that now she speaks her mind freely. She works as a social worker with disabled children and families, and also supports victims of sexual assault, and she is genuinely devoted to helping others. I do not refer to her parents as my grandparents. I despise them. My grandfather went to prison and died without redemption, and my grandmother is still alive. About 17 years ago, my mother tried to rebuild a relationship with her and dragged us through it, and I tried to endure it for her sake, but eventually could not. To this day, my grandmother has never apologized for what she did or allowed to happen. Story 20. I was couch surfing through Japan around 12 years ago and spent some time in Nara with a woman who offered to host me. I am not sure whether it matters for cultural context, but she was Indonesian with permanent residency in Japan, not Japanese. She was very attractive, highly charismatic, and intelligent, and she owned a small dance studio where I slept on a mat on the dance floor, which worked well for me since I was also a dancer at the time. The only odd thing about her was her apparent lack of friends. After a couple of days of sightseeing and spending time together, we went out one night to drink sake, and as the alcohol flowed, her polished manners began to slip. She had previously told me about a planned holiday to northern Japan with her former best friend that had fallen through, and she framed it as him being flaky and uncaring toward her needs. That night, however, she revealed the real reason he canceled the trip, which was that he had recently been diagnosed with cancer and was struggling with chemotherapy. Instead of sympathy, this enraged her, and she spoke with anger about how selfish he was for ruining her vacation plans. Then she calmly said that sometimes she imagined herself as the angel of death, coming down in the night to cover his mouth until he died. I was completely stunned, both because it became clear to me that she was deeply disturbed and because my own childhood best friend had died from cancer as a young adult. I felt a surge of anger and fear, but it was the middle of the night. My belongings were in her studio, and I had nowhere else to go, so I stayed quiet and said as little as possible. I had been planning to stay another night and attend one of her dance classes, but instead I left early the next morning and cut off contact, wanting nothing more to do with her. Story 21. My uncle is a Vietnam War veteran, and one night while drinking, he confessed to me that part of the reason he never talks about that time in his life is because he does not remember much of it. He said he is grateful for the memory loss because it allowed him to move on and build a normal life, unlike many other veterans who were trapped in their memories and could never escape them. However, when the Vietnam War Memorial was built in Washington, District of Columbia, he went to see it and tried to find the names of the men from his squad, the men he had crawled through mud with, eaten terrible rations alongside, and survived the war with his brothers. He stood there staring at row after row of names and could not recognize or remember a single one. I cannot imagine the depth of survivor's guilt that comes with that, especially without even being able to comfort yourself by preserving their memory. My heart aches thinking about how alone he must have felt, knowing they were gone, and being too afraid to unlock those memories in his mind in case it destroyed the life he had built. It is like layered survivor's guilt, surviving the war when they did not, building a family and career while so many others fell apart, and then choosing to keep that door shut to protect your sanity. It is a reminder that no one truly survives war untouched, because even when it looks like someone has it together, that damage stays with them forever. Story 22. I had been reading this thread for about 2 hours thinking I had nothing to contribute when a memory resurfaced from when my father, who is a borderline alcoholic, came home drunk one night and told me stories from his career as a paramedic. He worked as a paramedic for over 30 years, and that night he came home and found me sitting on the couch watching television when I was about 13 years old. He shared several disturbing stories, but one stood out above the rest. He and his partner were called to a house in a nearby suburb late in the evening on a quiet street with no streetlights, and when they arrived, they noticed the front door was slightly open. His partner went around to the back while my father entered through the front, moving room to room until he discovered the bodies of a mother and her 3 children lying dead in their beds with plastic bags tied over their heads and blood covering the bedding. Before the police had even been called, his partner radioed him to come to the garage out back, where they found the father of the family attempting to take his own life. They managed to stop him and learned that he had murdered his wife and children because he believed the woman he was having an affair with had human immunodeficiency virus. He was taken into custody and tested, only for it to be discovered that he did not have the virus at all, meaning he had destroyed his entire family and nearly himself for nothing. Story 23. I always assume people are exaggerating, so I never really react to what comes out of their mouths. I just listen and quietly wonder what to do with whatever information they drop on me. So when the older man buying me drinks lowered his voice and started saying he had done bad things in his life and would continue to do bad things, I sighed internally and started thinking of graceful ways to get out of there before he made things uncomfortable. I hesitated, though, because this joyful Scottish man suddenly lost all the light in his eyes and began hinting at what he had done for some company operating in the Ivory Coast. He never explicitly said how he had harmed people, and part of me assumed he was making it all up, so I just let him continue talking. After a while, he thanked me for listening and said he hoped I was drunk enough not to remember. I sobered up very quickly and felt a real sense of danger, but I laughed it off and told him he would need to buy me another drink if he wanted to hear my stories. I excused myself to the bathroom, left immediately, and got on the first bus I saw. About halfway home, my world started spinning, and I can only remember following what looked like a dog-sized kitten around the neighborhood, taking a nap in a bush, and eventually falling asleep in front of my door. At the time, I convinced myself it was all nonsense. But I do not usually get that intoxicated on beer, and something about the darkness in his eyes and how disoriented I felt on that bus still makes me grateful that I did not stay to find out more. Story 24. When I was in high school, my dad came home extremely drunk, and my mom tried to get him to go to bed, but he refused. Over the course of the night, he screamed and cried that my mom had cheated on him and that I was not his daughter, and at some point my mom threw her wedding ring at him. My dad tried to drive away, but I hid his keys and stood in the driveway crying. My mom called one of his friends to come get him, and when the friend arrived, he hugged me while I cried and told my mom he was not going to take my dad back to his house. Eventually, my dad fell down the steps and passed out in the basement, and my mom slept in my room with us locked inside. When I woke up the next morning, my mom had already left for work, and I got ready for school and tried to leave quietly without waking my dad. He woke up just before I left and complained that my mom and I had overreacted and were being unreasonable the night before because he had only had a few drinks. I went to school completely overwhelmed, and when I got home, my dad demanded to know what had happened the night before. I told him everything, and he hugged me, told me he loved me and that I was his daughter, and then went to work. It has never been brought up again. I believe my mom cheated, and I have never understood what she saw in my dad. But I do believe he is biologically my father, even though I have never tested it. Story 25. About 6 years into our relationship, right before we got married, my husband got drunk one night and broke down crying. He had always struggled at that time with lying, substance abuse, stealing, and generally destructive behavior. But I saw something good in him. That night, he opened up about his childhood, and I realized that his addictions and behaviors were how he coped with severe trauma. His stepfather abused him repeatedly when he was a young boy, and he was often left alone for days at a time while his mother traveled with this man for work. He would go hungry for days, stole food just to eat, and took toys because he never had any of his own. He frequently missed school, sometimes appearing midway through the year only to disappear again, because they were constantly moving, being evicted, or because the abuse was so severe he could not attend. Child services intervened and placed him in foster care in boys' homes, but he was repeatedly returned to his mother. That man died about 10 years ago. His mother is still alive and has apologized, but he has never forgiven her, and they are not close. And in my opinion, she still treats him poorly. Over the years, my husband completely turned his life around. No substances, only occasional social drinking, trade school, a stable job, and no more lies or stealing. He is the good man I always believed he was, and I love him deeply, but it devastates me that he ever had to endure that kind of childhood. A few years ago, we learned that his stepfather had also abused his younger sister, and she is now in therapy and doing her best to heal, and she is an incredible person as well. Story 26. I had a new college roommate one year, and he was generally a normal guy. When we actually became friends and not just two people sharing a room, we decided it would be nice to get drunk together and have some bro time. We got extremely drunk and started sharing stories about high school parties. I mentioned that I had thrown a really big party, and he immediately said he had too. But this is where things took a turn. He described organizing it, getting kegs, hiring a DJ, and how it felt similar to the movie Project X, which was a big deal at the time. It sounded like a typical wild high school party, until he paused, spaced out, and said it got really out of hand when local substance dealers and their crew showed up and took over. They robbed his house and stole everything his family owned: jewelry, televisions, furniture, leaving nothing behind, and there was nothing he could do because they were just drunk kids and these were armed adults. He said the house was completely destroyed and a huge amount was stolen, so I asked if things ever worked out or if he got any kind of closure. At that point, he stared into the distance even harder, with a strange look in his eyes, and then said he would tell me what he did. He confessed that he stalked the main dealer, found out where he lived, climbed over his fence one night, and killed the man's dog, considering that to be enough revenge, and said he got away with it. He went to sleep shortly after telling me this like it was nothing, while I lay awake all night, and he was asleep within about 20 minutes, even though we shared the same room. What made it even more unsettling was that he was genuinely one of the kindest people I knew. He was loyal, supportive during my worst breakup and depression, the kind of person who would help you move furniture in a blizzard, always calling his younger siblings and speaking to them gently. And I am fairly sure he even sent money home to his parents. He once cried because he felt guilty for not being around as his younger brother entered his teenage years. Part of me still wants to believe he made up the dog story to intimidate me because he was older, from a rough neighborhood, and the new guy in an established friend group. But that graphic detail always stayed in the back of my mind. We are not close anymore since he moved across the country and focused heavily on his studies. But the last I heard, he is an engineer with a fiancée and 2 dogs. Story 27. People always seem to confess to me when they are drunk, but one particular confession and everything that followed has stayed with me for about 20 years. I was meeting a friend's wife for the first time during Thanksgiving, one of many holidays I spent with their family. I had known him for about a year and had spoken to her on the phone before, and as we talked and drank more, the first thing she told me was that her husband cheated on her. It was not entirely shocking, although it was strange hearing it directly from her. A few beers later, she nearly gave me permission to sleep with her husband, which I did not do, thankfully, because they later became like a second family to me. Much later that night, her mother arrived and they had a tense exchange. And after her mother left, she broke down and told me that her uncle had started abusing her when she was 4 years old. When she was 12 or 13, she finally told her mother, who accused her of lying and trying to destroy the family. About 8 years after that Thanksgiving, she cut off contact with her mother entirely. At one point in the years between, her mother even told me about the abuse herself in front of her daughter in a way that felt deliberately cruel, and I told her I already knew and that it was time for her to leave. About 10 years ago, her mother died, and I received a phone call from their daughter, who had become like a younger sister to me, furious that her grandmother's brother was not invited to the funeral and that her mother was considering not attending. It took me 10 minutes to realize the daughter had no idea about the abuse, which was shocking because she herself had been assaulted as a teenager and had received support, therapy, and reassurance that it was not her fault. I listened, then told her she needed to speak with her mother and that I fully supported her, but that was all I would say. A few hours later, she called me back in tears after learning the truth, and that moment became a breaking point for the family. No one speaks to the sister or the uncle anymore, and they were the only relatives who attended the funeral. Story 20. My mother came home after drinking with the neighbors and cried in the shower, and when she refused to talk to my father, he sent me in to check on her, and I was about 17 at the time. She confessed that she hated my father and had been sleeping with our neighbor, and she used manipulation and fear to force me into keeping quiet. She was already a mentally and emotionally abusive narcissist, so it was not surprising that once her secret was out, she seemed almost relieved and would constantly share details of the affair with me, acting giddy and excited. It made me deeply uncomfortable, and I wanted to cry every time, but she would threaten me and insist that I was beneath her and therefore had no choice but to listen. Their marriage ended a few years later, when she was caught cheating again with a different man from work. My father was surprisingly willing to forgive her and attend counseling, completely unaware of the first affair. But she had already moved on and believed she had done nothing wrong, claiming he had neglected her and that his use of adult material was somehow worse in her eyes. The divorce was brutal, and my brothers and I were caught in the middle of it. As the oldest, I tried to protect them as much as I could, but her side of the family disowned us for supposedly loving our father more, and my middle brother is still deeply affected. I admit my father was the lesser of two evils, so I chose to live with him after I turned 18, not because he was a good parent, but because he neglected me rather than actively abused me. A little over 10 years after that night, I finally told him about the first affair and how she had forced me into silence, and he was devastated. Not long after, he still chose his girlfriend over me and made me leave, forcing me to live with my mother again until I moved in with my boyfriend, who is now my fiancé. It may not be as extreme as some stories, but it left a lasting mark on my life. Story 29. My wife and I used to be friends with a man who was already strange, though not initially in a frightening way. Around the time we were buying a house, he and his boyfriend broke up, and since he was in a bad emotional state, we let him move in with us. Not long after, one night while we were all drinking together, he started talking obsessively about his ex. We were still friends with the ex and usually tried to shut those conversations down, but he kept drinking and becoming more emotional. Eventually, he broke down crying and kept repeating that he had done something terrible and that he was a horrible person. We tried to calm him down and finally told him he could tell us anything. That was when he confessed that he had killed his ex's cat while they were still together. He explained that he believed he was doing the right thing because the cat was not supposed to be there, had gotten pregnant before, and he was afraid they would be discovered and lose their housing. He said he poisoned the animal, and when that did not work, he killed it and disposed of the body, then told his ex that the cat had been hit by a car. Later, I learned he had done this to another cat as well. After that confession, we began noticing increasingly disturbing behavior, including manipulation and gaslighting. We eventually managed to get him out of our home after about 6.5 months, and only then did we begin to feel safe again in our own house. Story 30. A little over a decade ago, I hosted a party for my then-girlfriend's very close high school friends who had joined the United States Marines after graduation and were back in town from deployment in Afghanistan. A few hours into the night, my girlfriend started panicking because no one could find one of them, who had been seen earlier stumbling around and acting erratically. Someone said he had started walking down the road with a bottle of whiskey, so I went outside and noticed him sitting in the passenger seat of my old unlocked car. I got into the driver's seat, and he immediately began unloading on me about the things they were ordered to do during the war, talking about entire cities being wiped out and receiving orders to shoot every living person, including women and children. He grew especially quiet when he told me about an incident involving a baby. He said he had joined the Marines to fight enemies and protect his country, not to harm innocent people, and that it had permanently damaged him and his friends. One of his friends had even cut his own face open with a field knife while staring into a mirror and had to live with the scar. Sitting there together, he cried openly, and we shared drinks and talked quietly before eventually returning to the party. This happened over 10 years ago, and I cannot know for certain how much of what he said was true, but it never felt like something he was inventing. I am no longer in contact with any of them, but I genuinely hope life has been as kind to them as possible after everything they carried home with them. Story 31. I went on a beach holiday with my gay best friend and his childhood friend and her young daughter, and at the time I was 26 years old. My best friend was 29, the woman was 27, and her child was 2. My best friend's friend had been cheating on her husband with multiple men, while her husband was possessive, controlling, and verbally abusive, especially after she had the baby, who was his child. When she found out we were going on holiday, she begged to come along, had no one to leave her child with, and brought her with her. What we did not know was that she had also invited her 21-year-old lover on the trip without telling us. We were shocked when this man showed up at our rental, but there was nothing we could do. And although it makes me uncomfortable now, I know I enabled cheating even if I did not approve of it. Every evening, she and this man would go out and leave the child with us to babysit, which felt deeply wrong. Toward the end of the trip, we were all drinking together at the house while the child was asleep, when her lover started telling us that since he was 9 years old and visiting his grandparents' village, he would seek out stray cats in order to kill them. He explained that as he got older, he became more creative and cruel in the ways he harmed these animals. While my best friend and I felt physically sick listening, his girlfriend laughed, and I could not tell whether she thought he was joking or genuinely found it amusing. He went into disturbing detail about how he would sometimes feed the prettier cats, care for them, gain their trust, and then torture them. He said he only did this at his grandparents' home because there were many stray animals and no one would notice. He then told us that when he was around 16 or 17, he began doing the same thing to larger animals like stray dogs, describing graphic methods of harming them. The most horrifying part was that he slept in the same room as the 2-year-old child and her mother, while repeatedly saying that there was something beautiful about having control over something small and fragile. All I could think about was that child in the next room. I never saw any of them again, and I did not tell the husband because he was a dangerous man involved in criminal activity, and it did not feel safe to do so. Story 32. I was in college when my roommate, who was over 21, invited me to a party for one of his friends who had just gotten out of jail. That alone felt like a warning sign, but as a 20-year-old, I was tempted by the free alcohol and went anyway. After a few hours of drinking, we were standing in a circle talking when one man began telling a story about something that had happened to his younger sister in high school. He said she came home one night after a party and claimed that her boyfriend had assaulted her, so he and several other men decided to go after the boyfriend. They found him at the party, forced him into a vehicle, drove him into the woods, and brutally beat him. He then described tying the young man to a tree and letting his truck press into him while idling, eventually crushing him until he stopped breathing and died. What terrified me was not just the story itself, but the way he told it casually, as if it were a joke. I realized immediately that I was surrounded by the wrong people, and not long after that I transferred colleges and moved across the country to escape that environment. The worst part came when he finished the story and laughed, saying that his sister later admitted she had lied and only wanted an excuse to end the relationship. Several of his friends laughed along, and I forced myself to laugh too because I was genuinely afraid. Story 33. I was around 13 or 14 years old at the time and was close friends with a 17-year-old guy I will call Aaron, and I would sometimes buy marijuana from him or sneak out at night to spend time together. One summer he suddenly stopped talking to me, and I had no idea why, but I brushed it off because he was mysterious and prone to mood shifts. I had a rough few weeks after that, since I was not very popular and only had 2 or 3 close friends, none of whom were available. So eventually I worked up the courage to message Aaron and ask if I had done something wrong. He was intimidating and had done frightening things in the past, including pointing a loaded firearm at me, collecting knives, and joking about killing me. So I was scared of him, even though he could be kind at times. When I asked him what I had done, he initially said he did not like my energy, which hurt, but I accepted it and thought that was the end of it. A few minutes later, he sent a long emotional message saying he was drunk and that the last time I was over, he had wanted to seriously hurt me because I playfully hit him while we were joking. He told me I should be grateful he controlled himself and said he never wanted to see me again. Then he followed that with more messages saying he used to like me and still did, but never said anything because he assumed I would not be interested, possibly due to the age difference and the fact that I am not attracted to men. Within minutes, he had told me he disliked me, wanted to hurt me, never wanted to see me again, and also had feelings for me. I assumed he had forgotten about it because we did not speak again and the messages disappeared. Later, I went to buy marijuana from him and brought my brother and my best friend with me. And after I paid and tried to leave, he stopped us. He told me I could stay and explained that he stopped talking to me because the people I spent time with assumed they were friends with him too, and he only wanted to sell to them, not socialize. I told him that was not the explanation he had given me before, and he calmly replied that he remembered every second of that conversation.